Hello there. I'm Dr. Audrey Wells, and I'm joined today by Michael Nathans, who is the CEO of WhisperSom, and we're doing a webinar to highlight the importance of a new sleep technology. We're going to walk you through what this technology means for the field of sleep apnea, and we're going to evaluate how it's valuable to each of the stakeholders involved in using this device. So, Michael, I want to welcome you today and start off with some background about how you came to be the CEO of WhisperSom and then you work so hard to create a treatment solution for sleep apnea.
Well, thank you, Dr. Wells. It's great to be here with you today and talk about, what got WhisperSom started. And it's this, it's the inventor has sleep apnea, and his dentist one day suggested, knowing that he was a electrical engineer and an audio engineer, why don't you invent something you can wear on your wrist that would treat your sleep apnea? So my inventor partner went to work and came up with a proof of concept that he tried on himself in place of his CPAP, and he wore an oximeter on his wrist, and lo and behold, it reduced his desaturations at night. So he knew he was onto something. He filed a patent application, and sort of the rest is history, except for the fact that he brought me in as a co-founder.
Fantastic. And I know that you're really motivated in terms of helping people and disrupting the sleep apnea market, so to speak. So, from a personal level, what sort of drives you to make an impact?
Well, my dad had sleep apnea, and I watched, and he was a dentist, and he could have made himself an oral appliance, but he knew it would change his bite. So he used a CPAP device for years. And he would take it with us when we'd go out on our boat for the weekend, and he was very compliant. But it was a chore for him to carry it around with him, but he was dutiful about it. Um, but I could when my co-founder told me about the opportunity and his improvement on that technology, I sort of dove in, did some research, and came across that 2010 landmark Harvard McKinsey study
Mm-hmm.
that said that this is costing those that pay for CPAP or pay for treatment today billions a year. This would be insurance companies and employers, self-insured employers, health insurance companies and self-insured employers. And they said these stakeholders, if you will, have the most to gain economically from a more comfortable technology than CPAP. So I didn't set out to disrupt the market, but with a 5% treatment rate, and realizing it's because of the current gold standard of care is so objectionable to so many, keeping the treatment rate that low, that maybe we could do better and raise that treatment rate. And that seemed like a good challenge for me at this stage in life. And, having the experience in business and, a degree in biology, I just found this a great challenge.
I think that really speaks well for the longevity of the company to date. You've been in operation for coming up on a decade, if I'm not mistaken. Is that
A
right?
little, slightly past that, actually.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, there's some legs to this, and we'll get to what the device is and the iterations it's gone through in a minute. But I want to add some information from my end of things because we've known each other for a little over a year now. And, I'm a sleep medicine physician. I'm very experienced in adult and sleep medicine diagnosis, treatment, and long-term management, both for adults and children. And as you know, I've been searching for a viable CPAP alternative for years. And there's been a lot of attempts at this. There's certainly a high motivation to help people who are so adverse to the tube, the mask, and the machine that lives on your bedside table. So I think there's a lot of alignment with the stakeholders, whether you're talking about patients, insurance providers, or investors, to kind of find something that's going to work better than the old style technology of a CPAP. And it's still our gold standard. But I know that there's hope on the horizon, and I think that WhisperSom offers a great opportunity to explore that. So with that sort of alignment on the limited uh, treatment effects of CPAP, I want to just bring up a couple of statistics. Every month, there are about 250,000 home sleep apnea tests performed, probably more as people become more aware of sleep apnea. And, you know, to that end, most of the prescription treatments, when someone gets the diagnosis, are going to be for CPAP. You also have surgical routes and oral appliance or dental routes. But most people today are still prescribed CPAP. And in the United States, about 80% of sleep apnea among all the people in the United States is undiagnosed. So there's lots of meat on the bone. There's a huge burden of disease out there, not just for treatment, but for diagnosis. So home sleep apnea testing is the recent way to sort of address that burden. Where sleep apnea is concerned, I think a lot of people discount that condition because it's your sleep. And for Americans especially, sleep is a negotiable sort of biological need. People pinch their sleep in by staying up later or getting up earlier to be more productive. But I wonder, give me your sense of what sleep and healthy sleep would mean to Americans as a whole.
Well, if you look at the comorbidities associated with untreated sleep apnea, and we're talking about sleep apnea disrupting sleep,
Hmm.
and for that reason, not letting you get the kind of sleep you need. But worse, every time your sleep's interrupted by an apnea, it sets off a host of biological functions that are just bad for every organ in your body, especially your heart and your brain. And these happen with people with untreated sleep apnea many times a night. And over the course of years, the damage from that is cumulative. And it can start when you're an adolescent. And so it can start when you're, after you've had your tonsils out, if that's been, or your adenoids, if that's been blocking your airway as a kid, as a child, but your sleep apnea persists. It's really important to treat it in kids because untreated, it exhibits symptoms like attention deficit disorder, learning disabilities, um, hypertension, depression in kids. And, in adults, it turns into AFib by age 40 and cardiac disease, heart attack, strokes, and even Alzheimer's. There's a link between sleep apnea, untreated sleep apnea, and the development of Alzheimer's disease. So those are very serious comorbidities from one treatable disease.
Exactly right. I mean, it really has a part to play in all the top 10 causes of death and disability in the United States.
Yeah. So, and that's the cost to patients, but the cost to those that pay for their health care, the numbers are surprisingly high. And they were
Mhm.
highlighted in this Harvard McKinsey study. And there's a methodology to figure out if you're an employer based on your head count, or if you're a health insurance company, including Medicare and Medicaid, based on the number of beneficiaries you have, based on the published studies for how much extra it costs for an employee in terms of healthcare insurance,
Mhm.
beneficiary in terms of their healthcare insurance a year. If you've got untreated sleep apnea, and depending on your age, it can get really expensive. For like over 65, it's like 19,000 a year for Medicare. And if you do the math on their beneficiaries and the prevalence rate, which is 56% in older adults, times 19,000 a year
Per person, correct?
per
19,000 person.
per insured life
Hmm.
or beneficiary.
Yeah.
I mean, the numbers are shocking. And
Yeah.
this impacts the federal budget and the deficit. And it's because Americans by that age are so unhealthy. They are expensive these diseases that they develop as a result of untreated sleep apnea are expensive to treat. And the quality of life is not good. And they're not as productive as, American citizens as they would be and enjoying a quality of life. But boy, it's expensive for taxpayers.
Right.
And then you've got the VA and they've got their healthcare program, and the same situation exists there, only it's worse because a lot of veterans have PTSD And untreated sleep apnea just worsens PTSD and increases the suicide rate among vets. And getting them something that they can tolerate I think as soon as possible should be a warp speed priority for the new administration's regulatory agencies, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, there's expense on many levels. You touched on the financial cost, the burden to people who pay for care. And when I speak to the patient sitting across from me, I will highlight the neurocognitive deficits that result from untreated sleep apnea or undertreated sleep apnea, the cardiovascular disease that comes from untreated sleep apnea, the metabolic problems, namely diabetes and weight gain, even to the
Yeah.
point of being an obesity contributor. And finally, mental health and well-being is going to erode away when someone's sleep apnea is untreated or undertreated. I think that the current treatment landscape is well known to most Americans, even to the point where I've seen people be reluctant to talk to their physician about symptoms, or even to proceed with testing for sleep apnea because they see that CPAP at the end of the line and they don't want that.
Right.
So, when it comes to choosing a treatment, I've always talked about CPAP as the gold standard because it's multi-level airway support. Then there's the oral appliance, which you mentioned. So that's non-invasive. It's a dental device that brings the jaw forward. And then there's some surgical options. In the past, there was sort of a debulking procedure for the tissues in the back of the throat. More recently, we've got treatments that stimulate the hypoglossal nerve. Inspire is the most well-known of those, and that causes tongue scrunching forward when that nerve is activated in alignment with breathing. And it's a tough sell for anyone when I'm trying to tell them these are your choices. Like, none of them sound appealing. So I know that you've done some legwork and sort of looking at how these different treatments not only impact usability, but also the cost. And, what's been the sum of your findings when it comes to the treatments currently available?
I have a lot of people tell me that they won't get a diagnosis simply, as you said, because they know they can't they say, I know I can't stand the mask and hose. I'm not even, my wife tells me I stop breathing at night and I know I can't use it. And then they go on to say in some cases, and I don't want it on my medical record that I have sleep apnea and I'm non-compliant with treatment.
Yeah.
Because when I apply for insurance, that's going to show up and that's going to hit my rates.
And life insurance too. That's going to be a factor.
That's really what I'm talking about. It's life
Hmm.
insurance and long-term care insurance.
Hmm.
Because the underwriters look at that. I know I've been there on the underwriting side. So, it's a factor for underwriters, and the consumers are conscious about that, and so they avoid treatment. And the hardest part of my job, I did the field trials that we submitted to the FDA, the results we submitted to the FDA by myself, and it's about 125 nights of in-home testing with about 20 volunteers. And largely at first, we were just getting the device dialed in to see if we could get it to work the way we thought it should. And that took, some trial and error with different settings. It's got a lot of different neuromodulation settings, as you might imagine, and getting just the right combination of settings to get the effect that we wanted, meaning stopping apneas as fast as possible without causing an awakening, is something that we finally achieved in the last 7 patients and 21 nights of testing. And the results are, the treatment endpoints that we achieved are impressive, especially compared to devices that the FDA has approved already and looks like they're going to approve. But one in particular is Zepbound, the GLP-1 tirzepatide by Eli Lilly. Their effectiveness, they dropped the the rate of apnea is by about 50%. So if you had, 50 an hour, now you got 25 an hour. And that's not disease resolution. 5 an hour is considered disease resolution, but the FDA approved it for treating sleep apnea for obese patients. And in fact, it does help. Anytime you reduce your weight, if you're obese, it's going to help with your breathing. I mean, whether you use a drug or you can do it on your own. But if you can't do it on your own, GLP-1s are beneficial in that regard. But as a layered treatment, not as a primary treatment, because they don't achieve disease resolution like the gold standard does if you use it all night. Or like the WhisperSom device appears that it will if you use it all night. Like any treatment, you need to use it all night. But the real differentiator between WhisperSom's technology and everything else is it uses adaptive intelligence to figure out when you need treatment rather than provide what's called continuous treatment, like continuous positive airway pressure, whether you need it or not, or a continuous squinching of your tongue by the Inspire device, whether you need it or not. I mean, they're just not intelligent enough based on, their design to know the difference of when you're breathing okay and when you're about to have an apnea and preventing that apnea. And that's what our device does. So, I call it a lower dose treatment, if you will. We don't treat you nearly as much as other devices. It's more comfortable to wear. And I think it's a lot more tolerable. So hopefully people wear it all night. And that's the key. You just don't want to have apneas. And the hardest part of my job in doing those field trials is telling the volunteers who would quit their CPAP to start using it again. Now, because we ran a couple of nights of diagnostics, so I would show them how many apneas they had that night, and I'd list them in ascending order of duration. And it was sort of interesting because I would interview, the volunteer before we started this, and they'd sign an informed consent and all that sort of thing. But I wanted to get an idea of, what their sleep habits were, and so it usually was an interview, and their wife was usually there, actually always there. And they always said the same thing. His snoring, and it's funny, his snoring annoys me, but when he stops breathing, it terrifies me. And I start counting the seconds before I give him an elbow and hope he starts breathing again. And then they usually say, and, I hear everything at night. I'm used to the kids coming in late and, hearing the door latch and the footsteps up the stairs and, the baby cry. And, I'm just very sensitive to that. So, I usually, hear when he stops breathing. I can show up the next morning with a report that shows 225 apneas, which is what, moderate to severe looks like in a night, 225 in this case. And they start looking at this list. And as they're looking at this list, the wife usually says, "Oh my goodness, you mean I slept through all these? There's so many." And then they get to be 20 seconds and longer. 40 seconds, 50 seconds, 60 seconds. And she's looking at this list, and the reaction is universal. "And you mean they last this long?" I mean, people have no idea. They're asleep. How would they know? And no one's timing it. Our device does. But it really seemed to create a teachable moment in my experience where I could say to people, this is why you need to wear your CPAP and don't wait for WhisperSom. Like the hardest part of my job. I wound up lecturing our volunteers, thou shalt use thy CPAP.
Let's jump into what the device actually is so that people can picture it in their mind and contrast the actual physical components of the WhisperSom device in comparison to what CPAP looks like, the oral appliance, and the Inspire surgery, for example. So there's two main pieces to the WhisperSom device. Why don't you go ahead and explain those, starting with the body belt?
Well, the WhisperSom device is almost like a health tracker that you wear around your chest at night. If you think about, a health tracker around your wrist, but around your chest is the best place to measure your respiration, as well as your sleeping position, as well as your body motion during sleep. And we can also measure your heart rate there and your blood oxygen level. But that is where the primary biosensors are worn. There's
And
no
it's a
auxiliary.
stretchy belt, right? It's sort of neoprene coating or some sort of fabric coating.
It's a very comfortable fabric, and
Yeah.
um, it's very small, so it's not a shirt, so you won't,
Mhm.
get overheated while you're sleeping. Um, but it stretches a little bit, and that stretch creates an electrical current that we can measure,
Mhm.
and it's very precise, and it stays in place while you're sleeping. I've slept with it, as well as other people have slept with it, and they think it's much more comfortable than wearing a mask, for example, or having an oral appliance in, or having surgery for that matter. Um, but that device is connected to a pair of earbuds that you wear that are made for sleeping. And I have a pair here that I'll show you because they're unusual. They're not like the expensive Apple phones. They're foam covered pads that sit on your ear, not in your ear, and a memory wire that you can put in any position so that when you put it on your ear, you really want to make it so you have to spread it just a little bit to get it on your ear. But once you do that and fit it right, it won't come off while you're sleeping. And you can lay on your side against your pillow and it won't dig into
Mhm.
your ear canal. Um, so those are the two components. It's really the body watch that you wear around your chest and the earbuds, the whisper buds that you wear in your ears.
And what's the function of the earpiece? What are they doing?
So the earbuds will whisper to you when you don't take your next breath on time.
Hmm.
And the whisper sounds like this. And by the way, there are 20 different sounds, so you don't habituate to the same sound and start ignoring it. Um, but the sounds are specifically designed not to wake you up, but provide just enough energy down your auditory nerve to stimulate your respiratory pacemaker, which is in your midbrain, just so happens to be in between your ears. But the neurons from your auditory nerve pass through this respiratory pacemaker on the way upstairs. But if the sounds are just right, they never get upstairs. They won't wake you up while you're sleeping. But imagine this. People sleep with the TV on all the time, and it's pretty darn loud. There's sirens, there's gunfire. I mean, TVs can be loud late at night, and people sleep pretty soundly through that. Our sounds are so much softer and shorter in duration. So I'm going to simulate what it sounds like when our device whispers in your ear because it's reminding you to inhale. It goes like this. Psst, psst, psst. I'm
And it
making,
would be even sort of shorter pulses, correct? Just a little pulse of sound in order to create that response from the auditory stimuli to get you to breathe again. So it's not stopping the pause in breathing, whether it's due to airway obstruction or because there's a failure in the signal to breathe. It's simply truncating that stopping breathing within milliseconds of its detection.
well, yes. And to put a fine point on it, your respiratory pacemaker works like your heart pacemaker. So it fires an electrical signal every time you take a breath, believe it or not. And that signal goes down your hypoglossal nerve to open your throat and down your phrenic nerve to lower your diaphragm every time you take a breath. And if those signals aren't strong enough, either your throat won't open, but your throat might be open, but your diaphragm might not lower. But by stimulating the respiratory pacemaker rather than either the hypoglossal nerve, like the Inspire device does and Nyxoah does, or the phrenic nerve, like the Remedy device does, our device stimulates the respiratory pacemaker without an implant.
Mhm.
And by doing it that way, stimulates both the hypoglossal and the phrenic nerve. So it will cause somebody to take a breath. And the secret is to deliver the signal when they're going to inhale anyway. And what that really means is when the respiratory pacemaker is going to fire anyway. And all we're doing is boosting that electrical signal just a little bit and getting that respiratory pacemaker to fire, full strength, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah, without the signal going upstairs, it goes down your hypoglossal and phrenic nerve.
That was one of the things that initially I was very skeptical about. And I think that, It's this interesting concept because you would expect if there was this auditory signal that you would cause sleep disruption just by virtue of putting that sound in there. But because of the way the sound is delivered, you're really not getting that signal upstairs, that cortical arousal that
Correct.
is going to be terribly disruptive to sleep. And, you know, you sort of mentioned it in passing, but I want to really drive home the idea that one of the pieces of technology that makes this a much more sophisticated treatment compared to something like CPAP is taking advantage not only of the anatomical proximity of the auditory nerve next to these breathing pacemaker nerves, but also taking advantage of the physiologic mechanisms that naturally increase the muscle tone to hold the airway open. Now, one of the challenges I think a lot of people sort of foresee, especially now that we have this new medication that has been approved for sleep apnea because of weight loss. So, for those keeping score at home, that's tirzepatide or Zepbound is the brand name. A lot of people have said to me, like, oh my gosh, CPAP is not going to be needed anymore because we'll just make everybody lose weight. And you and I both know this is a huge myth. And so I want to shed some light on this because it's so, it's just this finding that is coming up into the public lately. So the way I look at it, and, again, I'm boarded in obesity medicine, so I have some expertise in this area. I think the availability of medications like Zepbound and other medical weight loss drugs is actually going to enhance the functional viability of a treatment like WhisperSom because you are eliminating a lot of the fatty tissue that causes that airway to be more collapsible. So weight loss is actually going to elevate the effectiveness of the WhisperSom treatment. And I'm really excited about that because more people then would benefit from layering these two treatments.
Yes, agreed. And weight loss is always the first recommendation for a patient presenting with sleep apnea and having a BMI that's too high.
Hmm.
Change your lifestyle, do something, but lose weight because you'll breathe better when you lay down. Lose some of that mass around your throat and you'll breathe better. But absolutely. And the myth, I think, I won't call it a myth, but I think the misconception is because Zepbound has been approved to treat sleep apnea. People think, oh, well, if I just use that, I'm treating my sleep apnea adequately enough.
Right.
And that is not true. It does not resolve your apneas to the point of what's considered disease resolution or 5 an hour if you're starting, with more than 10 an hour. And 10 an hour is mild. So for people with moderate to severe that have 30, 50 an hour, they're getting down to, 25, 15 an hour. That's over, 100 a night, way over
Yeah.
100 a night. That's, in a week, in a month, and that's not the stand. That's not a gold standard of care.
Yeah.
You know,
And I think another myth is that the only cause of having obstructive sleep apnea is deposition around the throat or in the belly. And the truth is that 25% of people diagnosed with sleep apnea, and potentially more once you get past the age of 50 or so, do not have weight as a significant risk factor.
no,
So there's risk related to other things like family history, risk related to medical conditions that aggravate sleep apnea. And even though excess weight is the number one risk factor for developing sleep apnea, the second biggest risk factor is age. And as our population ages, more people will have to go back into sleep apnea treatment, even if they have lost weight and have not regained their weight. So I think it's really important to keep in mind that it's not just a person's weight. We're still going to have to address all of the people who have sleep apnea independent of their weight or fat mass distribution. I think this is especially true for women who are postmenopausal as well. There's increased risk for sleep apnea among women in menopause that affects many aspects of their life and long-term health. And this is something that I advocate for and speak frequently about because I'm in that age group. I'm the avatar for that group of women. And I would love to see technology leverage to help that group of people specifically.
Well, it's an underserved group, but frankly, everyone with sleep apnea has been underserved by technology so far. It's no one's fault, but we can do something about that. And
I agree.
the market's ready. And I think policymakers, healthcare policymakers who understand what untreated sleep apnea, cost public programs like Medicare and the VA, I think they're ready to, stop seeing that money flow out like that and have, their patients and beneficiaries have a better quality of life and be healthier Americans.
Agree.
And
Yes.
frankly, this is a technology that we can export without, strategically disadvantaging ourselves, with technology that might give another country a military advantage, for example, but
Mm.
can make their populations healthy again too.
I want to bring up a point that I think really deserves to be underscored because I mentioned that at the beginning, disrupting the sleep apnea market. And I think WhisperSom has the capacity to do that in sort of a trifecta way. So I want to just outline that for the stakeholders here. When you think about diagnosis, treatment, and then long-term monitoring of sleep apnea, I want to point out that the WhisperSom device can do all three, meaning that in the phase where there's just data being collected by the device, you can diagnose sleep apnea and determine severity, even look at things beyond AHI, the apnea hypopnea index. You can look at hypoxic burden and micro responses of the cardiovascular system. So the diagnosis part has the potential to disrupt the home sleep apnea test market. That's huge. That's huge. Then the same device is available for treatment. So when the WhisperSom device is in treatment mode, it will look at the breathing patterns, and when that breathing pattern is interrupted by an apnea, which is a full stopping breathing, or a hypopnea, which is a partial stop in breathing, it can intervene with the sound that stimulates the phrenic nerve going to the diaphragm and the hypoglossal nerve bringing tone to the upper airway to open it. And it can do that on a case by case basis, meaning that the time in treatment is just a fraction of the night because it's only responding when you stop breathing to massively shorten that event. Thirdly, on an ongoing basis, someone could reassess how their sleep apnea is doing at any point in time by taking out the treatment component, or there could be customized treatment continuously being applied as a person ages, as a person gains weight, as a person is dealing with the 2 drinks of wine that they had with dinner. This is a very dynamic response, and all of that information would be available to clinicians on an ongoing basis to monitor longitudinal care. So diagnosis, treatment, and treatment monitoring are all available with this device.
Put a fine point on what you said about as you age and maybe you've had a couple glasses of wine that night and things might be different night to night, internight variability, it's common. The fact that the device can adapt intelligently to
Mhm.
what's going on with you at the moment, regardless of anything else, really differentiates it. Because a lot of the other devices are set it and forget it, or get reevaluated and change the settings if you've
Mhm.
changed. You can't hand anybody a CPAP in a box or an oral appliance in a box that'll fit them, or an Inspire device, or send it to their house and have them use it for treatment. There's no other device in the market I know of that that can be done with,
Mhm.
which makes it possible to change the way the standard of care is delivered for dealing with this life-threatening disease, where the American population is only 5% treated. I mean, imagine another life-threatening disease in this country that was only 5% treated.
Yeah.
And, but people shrug their shoulders because, there's CPAP and there's nothing else, and they know there's nothing else to talk about. So they don't talk about it. They don't look at what it costs, because why look at, there's nothing until there's something that can be done, like a new technology like WhisperSom. Um, but what becomes interesting in the conversation is that the perception that the cost of CPAP is so objectionable to payers that they'd rather not pay for anything unless they're forced to, drives the standard of care in the wrong direction, in my opinion. Meaning this, right now, the way somebody gets diagnosed for sleep apnea is when they come to the doctor when they're age 40 with AFib. And they say, Doc, I feel awful when I wake up in the morning, and I'm tired during the day, and I think there's something wrong with me. And the doctor says, well, let's give you a sleep test. And they invariably walk out with a CPAP. And the reason is that they stop breathing so many times during the night, they don't realize it. And they've been doing it for years. And like you pointed out, if they were awake and they stopped breathing a couple of hundred times during the day, they'd be beating a path to the emergency room,
Right.
because they're awake and they're aware of it. But when you're asleep, you're not. And that's what's insidious, about this disease. You can really call it a silent killer in this regard. Um, but the standard of care up until now has been, wait till they're so sick, because, you know, if you screen them early and tell them they got to put a CPAP on without them feeling awful, they're not going to wear the CPAP. You really got to feel awful to wear one of those, right? So we have an opportunity, I think, to screen before symptoms. And that's a big deal. Why? Because if you screen even kids and you find that they have sleep apnea, and you send them one of these in a box, it's not going to frighten them by looking at it. It's something they're used to. It's familiar. Earbuds they're familiar with. A Walkman. A health tracker they're familiar with. And I think that they'll be more inclined to try it, and it'll be comfortable enough from what we've seen to wear all night, which gives us the opportunity to really increase the treatment rate in this country from 5%. I mean, the opportunity is, it's large, and the cost savings that we can help achieve, for public programs like Medicare and the VA, and, state programs, their portion of Medicare, and, employers especially. It's a huge opportunity. And especially for employers to, imagine being an employer and saying to your employees, all right, all you employees who suffer from CPAP, or suffer from sleep apnea, and won't use CPAP, we've got something for you. And if you use it, you're going to save, without saying this, you're going to save us $5,000 a year in healthcare costs, and about another $2,000 a year in lost workplace productivity and absenteeism, which is why we're doing this. They're saying to themselves. But as far as the employee is concerned, oh my goodness, thank you, Mr. Employer. I'm going to send you a Christmas card for the rest of your life. I mean, I've been waiting for this, and you've brought it to me.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about building customer loyalty and retention and getting, more productivity out of your workforce. You couldn't send them a CPAP, in a box with a $200 Macy's gift card. They wouldn't use it.
I think that's true. And, this certainly is an opportunity for an end-to-end solution when it comes to sleep apnea, and also layering treatments for those who need it. So it's really ultimately personalized and comprehensive care. And as I mentioned before, as a sleep medicine physician, I've been looking for something like this for decades.
Mhm.
I want to kind of get back to stakeholders, because I feel like my role is in service to patients. It's as a physician, I also want to connect other physicians with the knowledge about a treatment like this. And then you've mentioned insurers and employers before, and then I want to talk about investors too, and some opportunity related to that. So for patients, I think the appeal really is that when you remove that antagonistic part of the end of your sleep apnea diagnosis, when you take the CPAP out of the equation and offer people something that's much more viable, comfortable, and really adaptive, then that burden of, I don't want to get tested because what's the point? I'm just going to be prescribed CPAP or surgery. That goes away. And so more people, I think, would be motivated to reinvest in their health, take another look at their cardiovascular conditions, their neurocognitive risk, their diabetes and obesity risk, and their mental health to start really prioritizing sleep even more because there's something that they can use and something that's going to treat all of these conditions. And ultimately, what we're talking about is not just better quality of life on a day-to-day basis, but also redefining how the last 10 years of your life are going to look as a result of months and years of healthy sleep before that versus diseased sleep that's going to sabotage those last 10 years of your life and take your independence away.
Hmm. Well, a man with pointed ears once said, live long and prosper. I'm talking about Dr. Spock, was it?
Yes.
Or Mr. Spock. I think it was Mr. Spock. Um, a lot of people, by age 65 have prospered, and now the secret is how you're going to live long,
Yeah.
and the answer is don't live a life of having apneas at night because it'll catch up with you.
I talk about this routinely. There's the sleep component. Disrupted sleep is associated with all kinds of diseases. In fact, there's no bodily system that's untouched with sleep disruption, whether that comes from sleep apnea, insomnia, sleep deprivation, restless legs, and all the other disorders. But one of the things that makes obstructive sleep apnea unique in addition to the sleep disruption, is that you have the drops in the blood oxygen level that really aggravate your sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight response that is so antithetical to sleeping peacefully. It's hard on your cardiovascular system and it's hard on your brain. You lose brain cells when your blood oxygen levels go down. And I think people really connect with that. And yet, the treatment is so repulsive that many don't go forward with that. And, by extension, physicians, whether they be primary care or specialist physicians who take care of the major and necessary organ systems, are also a little bit disheartened because when they refer people for sleep evaluation, they know too that it's going to be a tough sell for someone to get treated once the sleep apnea diagnosis is in place. And I see dentists as a real ally here because they can spend more time with the patients. They have an opportunity twice a year to have that patient contact.
Yes.
And more, they're getting informed and aware of sleep apnea risks and can be another voice of encouragement for people once a new treatment mode is identified, and especially something, again, that does the trifecta, the diagnosis, treatment, and long-term monitoring, like the WhisperSom device does.
And it's really perfect for dental practice. I mean, my dad was a dentist, and I know I've assisted chairside. I became a good chairside assistant. I did everything from root canals to fillings to mounting X-rays to extractions and
Oh, wow.
sterilizing instruments. But yeah, dentists and hygienists spend a long time looking down the airway of their patients more than any other doctor. And my dad really cared about his patients. And most dentists that I've talked to and the ones who are on our advisory board, they really care about their patients. And they've told me that's why they're interested in this. Um, they're as interested in their patient's health outcomes as any other caregiver the patient sees. There's only, there are limitations on what they can do for them, but treating their sleep apnea doesn't have to be one anymore because you don't have to fit a device or know how to do it or, any dentists know how to make, take impressions to make oral appliances, but they also know it's not good for adolescents, and putting that on, locking that device on the teeth of adolescents as their bite's developing and their arch is developing and that sort of thing. Even for older adults. My dad was a great jazz trumpet player, and he knew an oral appliance would change his bite and change his lip and change how he played. And so that's another reason he didn't do it. But most of the dentists that I've met are like my dad. They really care about their patients, and want to be able to provide a sleep apnea treatment that's tolerable, that they can have a billing code for, which we're anxious to get for our device. And we're anxious to get a billing code for treating sleep apnea that's a unique billing code, not lumped in with any other sleep apnea treatment, because we want to be able to measure with our codes the patient as well as the provider success rates, what you were talking about before. When a provider provides treatment, is the patient able to comply with it, and for how long, and what are the outcomes, and be able to track that to give those that pay for the treatment and fund those billing codes a sense that they're getting a return on their money.
Mm-hmm.
When you invest in health, you're supposed to get a return on your money. And we believe that based on the studies, we can document the kind of savings that, well, they have been documented, and all it requires is treatment. By the way, it could be CPAP, doesn't have to be our device, treatment all night.
Yeah.
And, you'll get these kinds of healthcare and savings. And as an employer, the lost workplace productivity and, workplace absenteeism and workplace accidents go down.
Mm-hmm.
And, by numbers that are significant on a per employee basis, which I think gives employers and health insurance providers an economic incentive that they never had before. It's not that they didn't have the will to help make their employees and their beneficiaries more healthy. There just wasn't a way when it came to sleep apnea. But now that there is, it can really change the way they approach it, which is not waiting for patients to show up with AFib and so sick. Now they're going to cost not only that insurer, but Medicare an awful lot of money by the time they
Mm-hmm.
get to Medicare.
Mm-hmm.
There's a way I think our technology can prevent that. And that's what is so exciting. And I'm sure you feel the same way a lot of the other doctors who are associated with our company feel about WhisperSom, is that, in normal practice, you get to see, 10,000 original patients. And if you're an ER doc, maybe 100,000. But with WhisperSom, we're going to have an opportunity to, have millions of lives under care, which is, I was pre-med and didn't go to med school, but a lot of the folks associated with us did, and they want to provide care for as many people in their lifetime as they can. And I think WhisperSom gives us all the opportunity to do that.
Yeah. I think there's some parallels there. There's sort of the chief medical officer of the home who's looking over his or her family. There's the physician and physician extenders who care for their patient panels, dentists, same way. And then there's the employer who is wanting their employees to be productive, efficient, creative, and emotionally regulated at work so
And not
that
cost them a lot of money.
true. And,
No,
all of,
don't drive the forklift through the wall, because you're
yeah.
browsing.
And all of these things are available with healthy sleep. And, I can even imagine in the future, the WhisperSom device actually giving a person feedback on how their sleep was, or even health monitoring or health accelerating ideas about how they should be shaping their bedtime, or what sort of things resulted in poor sleep or better sleep, depending on their health habits. So not only is it kind of a treatment, but it can be an active or interactive health platform for people to actually engage with, which will reinforce its use.
Well, the interesting thing about artificial intelligence is the potential for our device. I'm fond of saying our device uses adaptive intelligence. It's real. It's not artificial.
Hmm.
Um, but artificial intelligence will give our device the ability in the future to know how you're doing, you personally, how you're doing, and prompt. the way you use ChatGPT today or any of the large language models, based on how you prompt them, the information you put into them, and then ask them based on that to give you information back, can really help personalize this for individuals when they put their own data into it and listen to when you slip the earbuds on at night, how well you did last night, and wish you
Hmm.
pleasant dreams. And I mean, the by having um, access to information, auditory information before you go to sleep, meaning you're still conscious,
Yeah.
fed to you right before you go to sleep, might help you sleep better and might give you a reason to look forward to going to sleep, just to hear what you're going to hear that night.
I can think of all kinds of applications that would be spin-offs, white noise, binaural beats, words of encouragement and affirmation. All of these things are sort of having a vector toward health as well. And I think underscore some of the psychological aspects of sleep that aren't normally talked about.
Yeah, like the 2 a.m. panic button,
Yeah.
or you wake up at 2 a.m. worrying about, oh gee whiz, I got to do this, that, and the other thing. Tomorrow morning I got to get up 6 a.m. to so I don't miss my plane, and you can't get back to sleep, right?
Hmm.
You hit a little button, it'll feed you some audio content that hopefully will help you get back to sleep, take your mind off your mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
But and another interesting thing is treating tinnitus. So
Hmm.
there's a real overlap. Like 40% of the people who have sleep apnea have tinnitus, believe it or not. There's a huge overlap.
Hmm.
And we've filed a patent application to treat tinnitus through our earbuds prior to your falling asleep and combining that with your sleep apnea treatment once you are asleep. But that's an example of audio content that we can deliver through the earbuds to treat something in addition to sleep apnea that happens to occur an awful lot with people who have sleep apnea, according to the literature. I was surprised to see that overlap. And it gets even more interesting. This doesn't have to be, part of our, recorded session, but so tinnitus can be caused by the use of sleep apnea. I'm sorry, by the use of CPAP. And sleep apnea, untreated sleep apnea can cause tinnitus. So untreated sleep apnea can cause tinnitus, and the gold standard for treating sleep apnea can cause tinnitus, but for different reasons, for different, biomechanical reasons,
I
according
would
to
like to
according
see
to the
the literature
literature.
on that. I would like to see the literature. Okay, let's get back on track. Uh, Michael, I'm going to pivot into sort of speaking to investors directly because I think it's really important when you're the CEO leading the vision of this company to have your eye on the horizon and also your eye on the path in front of you. And there's a real opportunity for investors here, not just to disrupt the status quo and give help and hope to people who've been dealing with this awful condition that it's so common and so undiagnosed for so many. I want to sort of generate some excitement for those who may be looking to make a difference. And for investors, I think this is part of the humanity that comes with supporting a cause or supporting a company with dollars to take those next steps toward the horizon. So, talk about what sort of investors are a good match for the WhisperSom platform.
Well, there's really several kinds. One is patients who suffer sleep apnea who are accredited investors, and they've invested, people I know so far. um, Physicians who are accredited investors who care about having something other than CPAP to prescribe to their patients, have better health outcomes for their patients, have invested so far. Um, I believe that any professional investor stands to make an incredible return with our stock. If you look at the numbers, if you spend enough time looking at the numbers, it won't take you long. But if you realize the value of a sleep apnea treatment to any of the top employers or Medicare, It's in the billions a year. I mean, these numbers, if you take the time to look at the numbers, you realize the value of a sleep apnea treatment to all these B2B partners who could hyperscale us
Hmm.
because it's in their interest and it's in their economic interest. And the ROI is off the charts. It's PE levels of return to employers and to payers.
Hmm.
And frankly, the level of return to them on each WhisperSom device, on just one, uh, is more than they're probably going to get on our stock if you stop and look at it.
Right.
Um, which is makes it a very compelling economic reason, for our potential B2B partners, and they're the ones that pay for CPAP today.
Hmm.
The same ones that pay for CPAP today, and our device is the same price. So we're hoping it'll be an easy transition for them. But they can do something with our device they can't do with CPAP. They can send it directly to their employees in a box or their beneficiaries, and without a healthcare professional having to be involved, other than writing a script for either the diagnosis or the treatment.
Hmm.
No other device, you can't do that with any other treatment today. It changes the game in a way that's profound, especially considering the dollars that employers and payers can save by doing this and being proactive about it, rather than waiting for symptoms that get real expensive. There's a very inexpensive way to do it compared to waiting. So, we hold that potential for that kind of stakeholder, which you would think would make them the most logical investor in WhisperSom. They got the most to gain economically. United Healthcare Group, Anthem, CVS,
Hmm.
uh, Walmart, Amazon, United Postal Service, these large employers, a lot of employees or beneficiaries. If you do the numbers, have the most to gain. And when you look at it that way in our investor deck, it's um, it's it'll get your attention. Let's put it that way. It's compelling. It's compelling, and what makes it compelling is that it's possible. And the reason it's possible is the risk of of WhisperSom getting approved by the FDA is low. And the reason it's low is the device is inherently safe. It's inherently safe, and it's inherently safe, but there are more reasons. Besides its being inherently safe, it appears to be effective in field trials and far more effective than it needs to be for FDA approval based on what they've approved so far. And if you look
Hmm.
at what they've approved so far, if you use just a little bit of logic and look at our field trial results and understand that they're auditable, we can have them peer reviewed. The data, we didn't fudge the data. You can't fudge the data really. I mean, I guess you could, but Um, we set it up so it's auditable. We have files, you can play them back. I don't think we could really rearrange those files, honestly, knowing how they're structured. But we set it up so we have proof for anybody that wants to look at it when they're in the process of getting more of it. Uh,
Hmm.
so we think the risk, through the FDA is, the FDA approval risk is low, and we think the insurance reimbursement risk is low, especially for Medicare and Medicaid, given how much untreated sleep apnea costs them today and how
Hmm.
unsuccessful CPAP has proven, according to reports that they had commissioned by uh, an agency that evaluates the effectiveness of medical devices, who did a study on CPAP and found that it just didn't prevent the comorbidities it's prescribed for. It didn't seem to prevent all-cause mortality from heart attacks and other things associated with sleep apnea. It did appear to improve quality of life a little bit. Um, but the study also found that the apnea-hypopnea index was not the most reliable proxy for severity of sleep apnea, and rather the hypoxic burden index is. So
Yeah.
that same report, is one that really plays into what we've been developing, which is showing that it's not about how many apneas an hour you have, it's about how long they last and how much your blood oxygen desaturates. In other words, there's a big difference between a 2-second apnea and a 20-second apnea in terms of how much your blood oxygen desaturates.
Hmm.
So our device is designed to make sure that those apneas don't go longer than if they happen at all with our device. And the interesting thing about the data we gave the FDA, we did not set out to reduce the number of apneas per hour. What we wanted to show is when someone has an apnea and we treat it, how long it lasts compared to when they have an apnea and we don't treat it. But to
Hmm.
do that, you gotta let them have an apnea. You can't prevent it,
Yeah.
otherwise you won't have that kind of data. However, our device is programmable so that we can actually time it so we can prevent that apnea and provide the treatment before the apnea happens. And in fact, when we found out when we did that, it coincides more in rather than wait 10 seconds, just a hard 10 seconds. Rather than do that, do it at a different time that we found. We're more effective in finding that time when exactly the next inhalation is going to begin if we do it before 10 seconds. And we get a much higher success rate of preventing apneas when we do that. It's really interesting.
Yeah. And that sensitivity becomes important when you're defining the threshold to figure out where you are in diagnosis and treatment monitoring. And I think it speaks to the really low risk that occurs when you're just wearing the stretchy body belt and you have the earbud sensors, whispering in the ear, and this recording over the course of the night that's telling you how well the device is working. Really, it all seems like everyone has something to gain. And so the inherently low risk should make sailing through the FDA a breeze. I understand that's the very next step, the next target on the list. So walk me through what's needed to get that going.
So we've applied for FDA medical breakthrough designation for our device, and we've met everything the statute sets out and says we have to do to have that designation. And we went beyond that. We provided data, impressive data, which the statute doesn't require. So we're expecting breakthrough designation. And the reason we want it is because that gives us what's called a fast track through the FDA and through the Centers for Medicare and Medicare Services, which is insurance reimbursement, and that means market access, meaning people don't pay out of their pocket for their devices. They, want insurance. They have to have insurance. So, and the FDA and um, uh, the Department of Health and Human Services and CMS, Centers for Medicare and Medicare Services, have recently agreed they got to shorten the time between FDA approval of a drug or a device and insurance reimbursement and how important that is. But the fast track program under the breakthrough designation program envisions that that Medicare and FDA are going to sort of work hand in hand as we go through the approval process in terms of designing our clinical trials and looking at the requirements for improvement and having an agreement amongst the three of us. And we established that what's called a Q-sub meeting. So we're going to meet with the FDA, present them with our plan for our clinical trials, which includes how many patients we're going to study to get statistical significance according to our biostatisticians who've done the calculations. So we're ready for this meeting because we know what we want to prove in our clinical trials. We know how many patients it's going to take, about 70. We really want to do 100 anyway. So it should go kind of quick. And all it involves is going into a sleep lab for 1 or 2 nights and testing somebody with our device compared to a sleep lab polysom to see if the concordance, meaning the agreement between our biosensors that say someone's having an apnea or someone's not breathing, is exactly what the sleep lab device is saying.
Mhm.
And when someone says, and when our device provides a stimulus to stop an apnea or prevent an apnea, the sleep lab polysom equipment will show that, yeah, in fact, it did breathing started just like the device said it started, and it didn't produce an arousal according to the EEG equipment that's hooked up to people in a sleep lab. Those little sensors on your scalp.
Hmm.
That's how they detect whether or not you woke up. So we want to show that our sounds don't wake people up, according to the devices in a sleep lab, and that should be enough data for the FDA to say, yeah, this works as good or better than anything we've approved so far. You're good to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting, just going back to the field trials that you did, the response from people who had the opportunity to use it was, how can I keep this? How soon can I get a device like this? And I think from others that you've spoken to, whether it's insurers or employee-based health plans or people who are potential investors, the question is, can I try it? Can I experience it?
Hmm.
And in a lot of ways, the proof is in the pudding, but there's so many um, positive things that came out of the field trials. It seems that it should be smooth sailing through the FDA.
Yeah, I mean, it just stands to reason. If you stop or prevent an apnea from going more than a couple of seconds, you're not going to get those blood oxygen desaturations, and
Mhm.
you're not going to get the arousal that it causes. I mean, apneas cause arousals, and the reason is you're suffocating in your sleep and you're panicking.
Yeah,
And
it's a space that you're preserving your life. You have to wake up because you're literally choking.
yeah, and your body, excretes epinephrine, which is adrenaline in the commercial form, which is, a strong stimulant to wake you up so you don't suffocate. And so by preventing that from happening, we think we're really improving your sleep architecture substantially. And the other thing I'll say about our device, what I like to say is that it's transparent, and this goes to the monitoring.
Mhm.
Meaning, when we demonstrate in a sleep lab that our biosensors have a high concordance or pretty very similar to a sleep lab's their biosensors in terms of the data that they record. When we start recording our own data, meaning our own treatment data, using the same algorithms that the FDA approved, for what we told them how it works, um, the ability of the device to monitor its own performance is really kind of unique, I think, and will give both the patient and the provider and the ones who are paying for it, an idea of whether or not it's worth continuing. And we think that's really important. We think that transparency is really important, and we're really confident in that because I've watched the playback of these field trials. Meaning our device will actually play back like a polysom,
Mhm.
and you can see the breathing and you can see all these biofunctions visually, just like in a sleep lab when you play them back. And when I've seen people, we had one volunteer who didn't tell me, but she sleeps with this TV on. And I discovered it, after the first night of trials, because when I played it back, I could hear the TV. And you could see the breathing stop while the TV's playing. You could see our device deliver the stimulus. You could see and hear the breathing restart. And, I've seen that plenty of times without a TV, but when I saw it with that TV noise, if you will, and then right after that, another volunteer sleeps with a white noise machine. So there's this constant shh, and the recording in the background. I'm saying, what is this noise? And then I figured out, well, it's either, an air conditioning fan, but it's so constant. I asked him, do you have a white noise machine? He said, yeah. That's so much louder than our signal
Mm.
and so much more constant that when I saw that our signal broke through that signal, if you will, and worked the way it's supposed to, it convinced me. And, here I am raising money from people. I got to believe in what I'm doing. But I mean, that visual, just like a sleep lab, made a believer out of me,
Sounds
especially,
like it really
especially,
locked it in.
especially with the sound. I mean, the
Mm.
TV going, it worked with the TV on. Are you kidding me? Wow.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. And as you know, I've been learning more about this myself. I think in some ways, this really offers a new hope for anyone involved in helping people sleep better, whether that's on the front end with diagnosis, treatment, and management, or on the back end, improving their day-to-day performance and their long-term health. So I'm really glad to highlight this technology, to present it as something that's going to disrupt each piece of the sleep apnea market, from diagnosis to treatment to monitoring and long-term care. And I really want to just reiterate the commitment that the WhisperSom company has to helping people and being in service of not only health in general, but financial health and efficiency when it comes to payors and insurers. You know, that's really important to kind of hit all of the important aspects that come from healthy sleep.
Hmm.
Now, if potential investors want to get in touch with you or take a deep dive into the financial projections and how much this is likely to improve and learn about the ROI and the next steps, how would they get in touch with you?
Well, they can go to our website and, fill out a form, send us, an info mail, and we'll respond. www.whisperson.com.
And I wonder if you can drop your email address if people just want to contact you directly.
Certainly. It's mnathans, Nathans, at whispersom.com.
And I'm sure you'd love to hear from anyone who is interested in being an investor. This is what you geek out on, and I'll stay in the medical lane. But really a pleasure to speak with you today, Michael. Any parting words as we wrap up?
Yeah. um, I feel really strongly that I don't feel we're disrupting the sleep apnea market. With the 5% treatment rate, what we're really trying to do is raise the standard of care and get more people treated. So I'm really hoping, to get people have said, oh, if you can double the sleep apnea treatment rate in 5 years, that'd be awesome, and then maybe you'd have the same market cap as one of the leading CPAP makers. And, from a business success standpoint, that would be fabulous. But a 10% treatment rate for a disease like this is not impactful. It needs to be high, way higher. And I'm not sure we can do that by ourselves. I mean, I hope, CPAP makers sell more CPAPs and, more treatment devices are sold because, with a treatment rate like this in America, I mean, we should be doing a lot better. And, there are current devices out there that people can use, while they're waiting for Whisper. And frankly, you shouldn't wait. You shouldn't wait for WhisperSom. You should treat yourself now. But I don't believe we're disrupting anything. I think we're raising this, the standard of care is the way I look at it.
Fantastic. Well, pleasure to see you today, and I hope you get all the deep sleep that you deserve tonight. Take good
You
care.
you too, Dr. Wells. Take good
Take
care.
care.
Thank you.